Is there any way to restore or reform the Republican Party? Even Charlie Sykes, long-time Republican, doesn't think so. Here's why. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. So back 4 years ago in 2016, Charlie Sykes, after 25 years as a conservative radio talk show host, stepped down from that gig. He's also a well-respected and well-published author. He's the author of 9 books: A Nation of Victims, Dumbing Down Our Kids, The Hollow Men, The End of Privacy, A Nation of Moochers. Most recently, How the Right Lost Its Mind, which came out right after 2017. But in 2016, he wrote a piece for the New York Times titled Where the Right Went Wrong, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. He talks about conservatives actually believe things about free trade, balanced budgets, character, and respect for constitutional rights. I have been wanting for some time to have a thoughtful conversation with a Republican or former Republican about how the Republican Party can go forward. And I'm very happy that Charlie is with us today. He's the founder and editor-at-large of The Bulwark. The thebulwark.com is the website, a news site. And of course, the author of How the Right Lost Its Mind. Charlie, and you can tweet him at Sykes Charlie, Sykes Charlie. Charlie, welcome to the program, and thanks for joining us. First of all, are you still a Republican?
No, because I don't really know what it means other than being part of the Trump cult, and I'm definitely not part of the Trump cult.
Yeah, I get that. I grew up in a Republican household. My dad was a solid member of the Republican Party. I went door to door with my dad in 1964. I was 13 years old to campaign for Barry Goldwater. The year before that, my dad took me to a John Birch Society meeting, and I got John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason, and I read it, and I was terrified that the communists were coming to take out the State Department. 3 years later, I was, getting arrested in East Lansing in anti-war protests with the SDS. So that was my transformation, and I've been pretty much on the left ever since. But I certainly understand the old Republican point of view, my dad's Eisenhower Republican point of view, who actually supported labor rights, supported a lot, supported Social Security. They hadn't bought into this, Charles Koch kind of libertarianism, and they just wanted things to go a little more slowly, and were, not screaming racist. My father was not a racist. I don't understand how the Republican Party can reinvent itself given kind of the subtext to so much of what's going on before. Let me just go through this and then give you as much time as you'd like to respond to it. Balanced budgets, which the Republicans have been talking about forever. I mean, if you go back to 1976, June Winiski wrote a piece for the Washington Post, or for the Wall Street Journal, called the Two Santa Claus Theory, in which he said that when Republicans are in office, when they hold the White House, they should spend money like drunken sailors, drive up the national debt so that when Democrats come into office, they can then scream about, balanced budgets and the national debt to force cuts in social spending, which is exactly what happened. Reagan tripled the national debt from $800 billion to $2.4 trillion, and every Republican president has exploded it. So it's like there was never really a care about balanced budgets on the Republican side. Character, I think, stands alone. I'm going through your list from your New York Times piece. Character, balanced budgets, respect for constitutional rights, and free trade. And the respect for constitutional rights historically was mostly the 10th Amendment, allowing states to have segregated schools and things. I mean, looking back on the Republican Party in the 50s, 60s, 70s, was it an illusion?
This is painful for me to listen to, all of this stuff, because and that's a great question. I've been going back and forth on this conversation with Stu Stevens, who has a new book called "It's All a Lie," whether or not it was all a Potemkin village, whether it was all fake. Look, I think there were people who actually believed in that. I think there were people who were quite sincere. I remember when I was on the air in Wisconsin, I probably had Paul Ryan on my show more than 100 times talking about the danger of the deficit and the danger of the national debt. And then you look at what they've actually done, and it's a legitimate question. Was this all just simply a kind of tribal virtue signaling? Because there's nothing left of many of those things. And you wonder whether or not these ideas were really just sort of a thin crust over something else that was going on. And I'll be honest with you, I still wrestle with all of this. I look at people that I've known for 20 or 30 years and I thought were decent, intelligent, principled people, and watch one after another how they've conformed themselves to Trumpism. And it's an extraordinary story on a human level, but it's also a dangerous story on a political level.
So, Charlie, yeah, I agree, and I think back, and my dad has passed away a decade ago or more, but I'm wondering, was he fooled? I mean, was an entire generation of Republicans fooled by basically, racists and right-wing billionaires? And I'm increasingly thinking yes, which raises the question. It's a good thing to have an opposition party. I mean, that dynamism is the key to any functioning republic. And I want to have a Republican Party that can be the opposition to the Democratic Party, that has some integrity, and that actually, in the course of debates, it's one of the reasons I debate conservatives on this program constantly. In the course of those debates, issues they become more vivid. You begin to understand them in multidimensional ways. What would the principles be of a reinvented Republican Party, setting aside all this old rhetorical BS?
Well, I don't know. And by the way, I am skeptical about whether or not this party can reinvent itself. I think it's going to be a very, very long time. It will not snap back to any sort of reasonableness just simply because Donald Trump has left. I think we've got a real voter problem out there. So the other thing is, before I go into your question about the whole issue of racism, I think that a lot of us knew that it was out there, and you may consider this to be naive. We knew that there was the drunk at the end of the bar. We knew about the bigoted uncle and everything, but we thought that those were the fringe characters. This was maybe a recessive gene, but it wasn't. There were some of us who thought, maybe Jack Kemp and somebody like that, might represent a new, more compassionate conservatism. But I think that was the illusion. And I think it's one of those cases where the people, the best lacking all conviction, while the worst were full of passionate intensity. Because right now, there's no question about the Republican Party. I can't tell you what percentage of Republican voters are in fact racist or have racist ideas, because you can't look into someone's heart. But there's no question about it. The vast majority of Republicans are willing to tolerate racism. And I think that's an objective statement when you watch what the president is saying, when you watch what he's tweeting, even this morning. If you look at that and you go, yeah, I'm okay with that, well, then you are willing, by definition, to tolerate racism. So that's where we are at right here. So this complicates the issue of what are these principles. Look, I think in the push and pull of politics, there are, I do think that there's, the possibility of a center-right, center-left coalition that will talk about a politics of decency, that will push back against assaults on free speech, that will try to be as inclusive as possible, that will point out that, yes, there are tremendous overreaches and inequalities in terms of the economy, but let's not completely throw out the concepts of free markets and the ability of people to control their own destiny. So I do think there's also room for the voice of those who do not believe that every problem needs to be solved by government, and that centralized bureaucratic government is the most efficient solution to all of this.
So what I would like to do when we come back is actually go through some of these issue points. But for this conversation, and we can recap it very quickly when we rejoin our commercial affiliates, you said you're not sure that the Republican Party can even be rescued.
No.
We saw this in the 1820s when the Whigs collapsed, or the early 1830s, I guess. Are you envisioning something like that?
I don't know what's going. I probably not, but because it's so ingrained. I mean, I wish there was something like that that could happen. I think they deserve it, but I don't know. At this point, and what I'll say probably is that, my time horizon is very, very limited. I just feel like the house is on fire right now. We need to put it out, and then we'll worry about the redecorating later. confront the crisis that's right in front of us, and then we can debate policy.
Well, that crisis goes beyond the Republican Party. I mean, Donald Trump is doing the things that oligarchs do. I mean, the thing that freaks me out the most is that I've done, for years throughout the 80s and early 90s, I was doing international relief work all over the world, and I've been in a lot of countries that are run by dictators, tin pot dictators. And the main thing that they do once they gain power, however they gain power, is they then convert all of the various departments of government away from their primary function, whether it's, enforcing the law or administering elections or whatever it may be, delivering the mail. They change them from that being their primary focus to their primary focus being getting the autocrat reelected, because these countries still have elections. And I'm watching Donald Trump do that, and I have no recollection of any president, and I've written books about early American history. I'm very familiar with that, and I've been on this planet nearly 70 years. I have no recollection of anybody in my lifetime, or before that, for that matter, any president ever doing that, trying to change the purpose of the administrative portions of government. Do you agree with that?
I agree. I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely about that. I find it to be really alarming, and in fact, if you watch what's going on in Hungary and Poland and other places, you can see the creeping populist authoritarianism around the world, and he seems to be following that same pattern. So, very much the playbook.
And Charlie, I think we're in agreement that this particular president, represents an existential threat to the concept of what Democrats typically refer to as democracy and Republicans as a republic. And Madison, of course, used the words interchangeably. Free trade, balanced budgets, character and respect for constitutional rights. Those were the values that you defined as being traditional conservative values. I think we can debate free trade. That's kind of a separate issue. Yeah. But by and large, these are things that I would say are probably American values as well. What are these specific policy points that, if the Republican Party is to reinvent itself, I've been calling for years, for example, for progressives to get inside the Democratic Party and take it over. I'm guessing that eventually good former Republicans are going to be calling for, good former Republicans to get inside the Republican Party and take it over. What would be the cardinal principles, and what do those mean beyond the slogans? You want to pick a couple?
Well, yeah, I could. I mean, but I think I got to make it clear that my time horizon is very, very narrow here. I feel that I have a hard time thinking past the election. And I think what I mentioned to you before was say, the house is on fire. I want to put the fire out. I'll worry about the redecorating later. I want a party that actually respects the things that it claimed to respect before, like the rule of law, like character, like limitations on the power of government. I want to have a party that restores respect for those constitutional values that James Madison wrote about, as opposed to simply this tribal racialist, nativist front that we have right now. And I think it's going to be very difficult to do because, Donald Trump has caused a lot of damage, but he's also a symptom of something that was a pre-existing condition on the right. And I think that you have a media ecosystem on the right that is not interested in those policies and those ideas. It's more interested in power. It's more interested in playing these cards to divide us by race and gender and ethnicity. And I think that somehow we need to get past all of that. Because I think one of the things that I've realized over the last couple of years is that I thought that politics was about policy, and it is. But right now, I think it's more about values. And I can disagree with you on 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 specific policy issues, but I think that you are an honorable, decent, empathetic person, we can do business. And I think that that's kind of the point that those of us that are anti-Trump conservatives, that we're willing to suspend much of the ideological debate to try to get back to a point where we can actually work together as a system. Because we're in the middle of a national crisis, and I think you and I are roughly the same age. What's really striking about this national crisis is that we are not all in this together. we are not one America. We are two Americas. And I think that I want to see a party that gets back to being a spokesman for fundamental decency that may disagree on specific things, but at least will believe what it says. And right now you have a Republican Party that doesn't seem to believe anything other than the need to bow the knee to the Orange God King.
Yeah. It seems to me that the cancer at the core of our politics on both sides is big money, and that this comes out of the 1976 Buckley decision by the Supreme Court that if a billionaire wants to own a politician or even multiple politicians, that's free speech protected by the First Amendment. And then the Bellotti decision 2 years later that extended that right to corporations as well. That led to an avalanche of cash that led to Ronald Reagan walking into the White House in 1980. Is that something that the Republican Party could embrace, doing something about the corruption of politics by big money?
I think it's highly unlikely to come from Republicans, to be honest with you. And I think that is one of those balancing issues between free speech and money. But I will admit that this is one of the things that I've had my eyes open to, which is the role of the American oligarchy in driving the political parties. It's not just an imbalance of wealth; it is a dramatic imbalance of political power.
Well, Jerry Ford embraced restricting money in politics.
Right. No, and I think at a certain point, though, it's out of the bag. But there has to be something that needs to be done about it, because a handful of people in this country are driving a lot of the things that we're talking about. And when I was very much part of the conservative movement, I remember saying to people, if people actually knew how it worked, they would, let me put it this way, it's worse than they think it is in terms of the influence and the power and the clout of the oligarchy. By the oligarchy, I mean, a handful of billionaires who determine not just who gets elected, but who gets to run the think tanks, what is acceptable, what's happened to the conservative media, how many of those publications have become pro-Trumpy because the people writing the checks for them have required them to be. So, Tom, it's worse than you think it is.